Hello, I am Riele, and today I would like to share this painting process with you while talking some nonsense. Recently I've been posting the backlog of my art on Kara, older and newer works more or less at random, and while my skill and proficiency have gone up since some of them were made, there were some old outliers that got more attention than my current, more refined works. I didn't put much thought into that until an artist whose work I've been following for over a decade shared that the ideas, not artwork, from 2 decades ago got more attention from the audience than the current ones. And that got me thinking. Even though any fondness of your art should be flattering, let's face it, it may be unpleasant, when you came a long way working on your craft, developed some elaborate ideas, and what gets you quote-unquote popular is a sketch of Aragorn you made in high school and you were not even a Tolkien fan. Before we proceed, I should probably explain why we should consider preference for older works surprising and look for explanations for it, but if the opposite is true, we just accept it as it is. Usually the longer we practice something, the better we become at it, both in terms of techniques and in terms of ideas. It is very hard to escape progress, and art is no exception. Of course, if something goes terribly wrong and you sustain brain damage or develop dementia, you can regress, but we are luckily not there yet. I'm eager to delve deeper into all the varieties of regression in some future video, but let's be optimistic and presume our art should be getting both better and more popular for now. Of course, some part of popularity is random chance, and we should never disregard the null hypothesis that people just like random artwork regardless of their merits. All observed differences are random, no actual trends exist, and the world doesn't make any sense. Luckily, this is not the whole story, and popularity usually is not totally fortuitous. Speaking of popularity, give this video a like as an offering to the algorithm, and let's proceed. The biases favoring older or newer works can be divided into 2 broad categories: synchronous and asynchronous. This is just something I came up with and no formal classification. What do I mean by that? What I call synchronous preferences refers to the preferences of a new, naive audience exposed at roughly the same time to artworks created at different times. A pure example of it would be an artist who spent 50 years painting different pieces in their basement, never exhibited any of them, and then either presented them at an exhibition or uploaded them online all at once. And under such circumstances, some of their pieces may do better than others, and that may correlate with the time when they were created. Asynchronous preferences would encompass everything else. For example, an artist was more popular a decade ago than now on a certain website, or they used to exhibit their works at more prestigious places and sold their works for higher prices. Or vice versa, one can be more popular now than a decade ago, but such cases seem trivial and don't require an explanation. After all, by later time points, people usually accumulate more experience and more connections and just get better at what they do. I don't want to talk about this asynchronous category much, just because it involves global trends that are outside of our control. Such trends may involve the overall economic landscape and how much people are willing to pay for art and invest in art, market saturation and competition, that is, how many artists compete for a potential client or vice versa at any given time. There may be different number of galleries that are interested in the kind of art one makes, and they change their capacity. If we're talking about social media, the algorithms change and favor different types of content. We can adapt to such trends, but we can't really affect any of them. However, one thing worth mentioning is the existing audience. If an artist built an audience working in a certain genre, the majority of the audience was probably interested in that particular genre. If one used to draw anime girls, their followers probably liked anime girls. If these artists were to start painting, let's say, traditional landscapes, some of their followers might follow along, but most people won't, just due to personal preferences. A similar issue is fan art. Sometimes artists build a community around a certain fandom, but when they transition to their original ideas, the audience engagement radically drops. In such case, one has to just grind through that and have realistic expectations concerning the possible niche. Of course, one can create a new niche and involve new people who were not even interested in art before, but you can't count on that. A couple of commenters on Caro brought up an interesting point about transitional periods. We might be comparing your previous all-time best to the current average. As I'm a biologist, I would rephrase that in terms of fitness landscapes. In evolutionary biology, fitness landscapes or adaptive landscapes are a way to visualize the relationship between a genotype and its reproductive success. In theory, these fitness landscapes are multidimensional, but for the sake of simplicity, one can show them as two-dimensional plot with peaks and valleys. If you are in the point A, in order to reach the point B on top of a higher hill, you have to cross a valley. As natural selection is just a natural process with no goal, in nature, fitness can only go up the hill toward the local optimum. We, as conscious beings, can make a decision to experiment and temporarily go down the valley. If at such a point in time you compare your output to your previous local optimum, then the current work might not just be less popular, it might be objectively worse. However, we define better or worse in terms of art. Still, with some practice and more experimentation, you will inevitably climb up the next hill, and the next hill might be way higher than the previous one. Or even if you are staying within your comfort zone without experimenting much, this might be explained as just regression to the mean. Super successful works are rare, and even if your level stays roughly the same or grows slowly, it takes a while to surpass your past success, especially if it was an outlier. In a way, some preference towards older works is a mathematical necessity. A related point would be a sort of survivorship bias. Artists who are creating for a longer time are likely to have had at least some success before, and success often equals popularity. Those who don't have any perceived success whatsoever tend to stop and transition to something else they are better at. So we end up with a bunch of survivors, quote-unquote, who had success before and probably are not experiencing it now to the same extent. But if we ignore all the asynchronous reasons, are there inherent differences between art created earlier and later in one's artistic journey, all things being equal? This question can be further subdivided into three parts: artist's biological age, artist's career stage, and the time when the artwork was created. Some features can be more similar between a 10 and a 60-year-old beginner artist, as opposed to the artist with 10 plus years of experience, while other features may bring together the 60-year-old beginners and 60-year-old professionals, as opposed to teenage artists. Yet some features may separate the art from 1980s and the art from the 2000s, regardless of the age of the individual artist. Concerning the effects of the artist's biological age on their artistic process, I didn't find much objective data. I found a tiny abstract that came out in 2019 by Ardelt and Orwell, who did a survey on older and younger visual artists who, quote, were nominated as artistically creative exemplars. They didn't find any differences in the described creative processes and style between older and younger artists, and described that each group thought about the other one. I could not find the full text of the paper, as I believe it was only presented at some conference, and I frankly don't think it's useful for our discussion. Partially because of the age groups in the study. They considered older artists to be 60 to 89 years old and younger artists to be 27 to 58 years old. Maybe I am biased being in my early 30s, but I wouldn't consider a 58-year-old a younger artist. Why did they choose such a boundary? The title of the journal is Innovation in Aging, and a quick search on the authors revealed that they focus on studying wisdom and changes in intelligence, in aging, and things like that. This is an important topic, especially after the second demographic transition, but has only tangential relevance for us now. Another study from the same author of artists in their 60s, 70s, and 80s from 1997 paints a very optimistic picture that, quote, A content analysis of the artist's written comments to the 6 questions and the ratings gave a highly positive picture of aging's influence on art. This study reported that quality and quantity of the art improve with the artist's age together with the artist's ideas and approaches to art. The presumed handicaps of aging, such as vision loss or tremor, were largely irrelevant or could be overcome. I guess this can give us some optimism, but it doesn't bring us any further. There are numerous studies that analyze individual artists' style development. It is very interesting to read about how Vasily Kandinsky's art changed over the years and decades. However, the plural of anecdote is anecdotes, not data. Are there any systematic and quantitative studies on style development across many artists? With the advent of big data, it seems obvious to employ machine learning to such questions, but I couldn't find anything of relevance. But I did find some quantitative analysis made using more of a manual approach. I have to caveat the following by saying that I am by no means an art historian, and my image analysis expertise starts and ends with analyzing fluorescent microscopy images, so bear with a complete dilettante trying to make sense of the literature. Around the turn of the millennium, David Gellinson came up with a correlation between the artist's methods and the time when they achieved success. Success was quantified as the time when they produced the work that was sold for the highest price, the time when they had their first solo exhibition, or the time when they produced the works that are now featured in art history books. While these are arguably not the greatest metrics of success, at least they're easily quantifiable. The information about the artist's process was taken from either their own accounts and memoirs or from the works of their biographers and critics. Then Gellinson performed regression analyses to find the relationship between these 2 variables. As a result, he divided artists into conceptual and experimental. Conceptual artists tend to bloom early and tend to know what they're doing. They have a clear idea of what they want to depict, even when they start the work, and they usually just transfer their mental image onto the canvas. Picasso, the ultimate conceptual painter, claimed, "I don't seek, I find." The experimental artists, who tend to achieve success later in life, have less precise goals and their process is more incremental. They oftentimes chase after a certain idea for a long time and rarely feel that they have succeeded. If it looks like a Procrustean solution to you, you're not the only one. And again, I am a biologist and I know the central limit theorem. If we look at any complex variable or trait, and artistic process is an insanely complex trait, any complex trait that is influenced by many independent variables, none of which is dominant, ends up being distributed normally. So most artists mathematically can't fall into these 2 extremes, but are somewhere in the middle. Also, they may gravitate towards one or the other side of the spectrum, even during the different times in the career, or even in the same artwork. Then the interpretation of what artists write about their process is not the most straightforward. Victor Ginsburg and Sheila Wires in their 2006 paper criticize Gellinson. In his Notes of a Painter, forgive my French, Matisse claims that for me everything is concerned with conception. It is therefore necessary to have a precise vision of the whole before starting. This is from page 124, and one would therefore classify Matisse as conceptual. But 3 pages later he writes that, "I work without theory, pressed by an idea that I perceive and that develops only as the work on the painting proceeds," which leads one to think of him as being experimental. Even Picasso's "I don't seek, I find," quoted by Gellinson as describing the prototypical creative behavior of a conceptual artist, is followed by sentences that are ignored by Gellinson. When one starts on a painting, one needs to have an idea, but only a very vague one. And what one does is what counts and not what one had the intention of doing. Ginsburg and Wires then tried to apply a similar methodology to old masters and transpose the conceptual versus experimental opposition into the opposition of reason and senses in art. That in turn can be loosely translated into disegno or invention versus colore or immediate painting. Again, two distinct classes is an oversimplification, and again, I don't think these things translate into one another, but they can be considered as the two extremes for the sake of analysis. And according to the authors, focus on drawing versus focus on painting is supposed to correlate with conceptual versus experimental process. And of course, when the authors classified old masters into these two groups, they found no correlation of their success with age. They also go back to Galenson's data on the American painters and have an interesting point. The average experimental artist was born in 1907.7, and the average conceptual artist was born in 1930.2, that is 22.5 years later. Why may this be important? Because maybe the changes in market conditions and atmosphere in New York after the Second World War was what allowed to peak both the younger and the older artists at the same time. Then the differences in their creative process are largely irrelevant. With all the caveats of this classification, if an artist in question is indeed a prodigy, they may feel that they cannot match their earlier success later on. So we again have a regression to the mean situation. So as you see, I have no answers for you, but only food for thought. I could not find any data on systematic differences in art created by artists of different age or different career stages. And even if these differences exist, the variability between artists is just too high to apply population-level data to individuals. A simple example would be that men are on average taller than women, but knowing that, we can't jump to a conclusion that a randomly selected man is necessarily taller than a random woman. Now that we tackled the artist's age, we should also talk about the time when the particular artwork was created. I won't be talking about the systematic differences in style across centuries, but only about subjective experience of age. There is a reason why people are fascinated by Paleolithic cave paintings. Statistically, things that are very old are exceedingly rare, so we tend to ascribe higher value to them. Moreover, the more time passes, the more information is lost, so even the most mundane objects from the past become a window to the past. Artwork is no different, and it doesn't have to be ancient to evoke nostalgia. If an artist painted an old wooden church in plein air that was later demolished, people who have some memories about this church would resonate with this artwork. Moreover, it doesn't even have to be the same church. This artwork would allude to countless old churches of which people have fond memories. I'm personally fascinated by the past per se, so anything that is older is inherently more valuable to me. I don't mean that it has to be an antique, but there is a certain nostalgia to art that was created even 10 years ago, and I'm definitely not the only person like that. Furthermore, artists themselves can prefer their older works because they associate them with happier, more stable times, while present works remind of the inherent uncertainties of the present. I have a few other considerations not backed up by any evidence that emerged during discussions both online and offline. They mostly deal with all sorts of confounding factors that in particular instances may associate with older or newer artworks. Preferences towards older or newer works may be entirely context-dependent. For example, if you post your works on social media, things that look good on small screens would be more popular than those that require scale for a full impression. Moreover, if we look at the websites and apps with square thumbnails, preferences would skew towards works that are either made square to begin with or can be effectively cropped without ruining the composition. However, if we exhibit the same works in a gallery, the story may be totally different, but then the lighting or the position can make or break the impression. Another important issue is that the audience who gives likes on social media, the audience who comments on social media, who purchases your works, and who promotes it to galleries, publishers, studios, and whatnot, are multiple different audiences who may like different things. And these different things, just by chance, may be more characteristic of your older or newer art. So a certain work that is older may go viral on social media, but nobody would want to buy the original, while another work that happens to be newer would remain fairly unnoticed, but would be bought right away just because it fits someone's living room. For many artists, a big chunk of their following online is other aspiring artists, and they may prefer something that they feel is achievable for them. While they may be impressed by complex, well-rendered illustration with multiple characters and complex lighting, they may dismiss it as something totally out of their reach. But they might like simpler stuff the artist created earlier in their career because they would consider it actionable inspiration or even study material. The next issue may be pertinent to many, but especially to part-time artists. By that, I don't mean that they're necessarily hobbyists. They may be earning their living by teaching art or working on applied or highly collaborative projects that dilute the contribution of an individual artist. There are seasons to life, and at different times, one may have more or less time and bandwidth to dedicate to one's personal projects. It can affect one's creative output both in quantity and in essence. It may well be that in your younger years you could create more freely and allocate more time to art, not being burdened by the necessity to support yourself and your family. The opposite might be true as well. In adolescence, you might be living with your parents and have all sorts of family obligations. School may be demanding, but as you grow older, you can plan your life yourself and have more bandwidth for art. Later yet, when you retire, you can again dedicate more time and thought to artistic exploration. Earlier work may appear more expressive and bold, albeit less skilled. There is a certain charm to naive art that even professionals try to imitate. It is also possible that when artists begin their journey, they tend to enjoy art more, as it hasn't yet become their source of income and stress at the same time. Maybe the sheer joy of creation can be read by the viewers. For me, this is too obscure to discuss seriously, but many people seem to feel this soul behind the artwork and value it, whatever it may be. My personal anecdote as an artist is that I always try to tackle ideas that I'm fairly certain I can accomplish well. This means that earlier in my artistic development, I gravitated towards flashier compositions with clear focal points, stronger contrast, and bolder colors. This was due to two reasons. First, it is easier to follow a simple recipe than to balance different considerations and create something new. The second reason is that these simple but effective compositions caught my eye, even when my artistic vision was less developed, while less obvious, nuanced compositions escaped my notice. It took many years to learn to see the beauty in the mundane. And these simpler compositions with clear focal points and movement look attractive on small thumbnails on small phone screens. What I have experienced as a viewer is that I often like people's work from the time when they were in art school and did more traditional art both in terms of media and in terms of topics. When they later transition to more commercial stuff, I tend to lose interest. It's time to wrap up this video. Please go and give some love to art both new and old. Share your thoughts in the comments, share this video with your artist friends, and I'll see you in the next video.